The year is 2024, and a Switzerland-originated software engineer wakes up from a bad hangover and realizes that his Twitter is filled with comments from people he now owe an explanation to. Who are these people? His customers. Sphagetti, an e-commerce website for buying furniture in the Middle West Europe, broke 2 days before a pretty significant day for the company's sales, Diwali. Precisely, it was a warehouse application which broke, due to which critical operations that were related to customers were suspended. Upon investigation, they found that the code related to a new feature addition was pushed unreviewed, and 3 days later, their code base was hacked by a group of people and was leaked publicly. So what caused this outsourcing debacle? Now let's get a little bit technical. This is a fetch button. When you click on this button, 2 APIs are hit simultaneously. So whatever I tell you from now onwards is what really happened in the code base. When you click on this button, 2 APIs are hit simultaneously. One is a REST API and the other one is a socket. So before we hit the APIs, we generate a 29-digit number. Let's call this number CID. So we will send CID into the payload of both the APIs, the REST API and the socket. Now the response that comes back will be stored in the React store. Assume that the first response always comes from the socket. So we will store that data into the React store. Now how do we store this data? We store the data in an object which has 2 fields. The first is the message field, which stores the textual data which is coming from the sockets. And second, we store the ID. Which ID, you ask? Well, the value of the ID is the same CID which we generated before hitting the APIs. But this time we are calling it FID. So it's not a problem, we're just changing the name of the key here. Now socket usually responds back with multiple texts, so each time we save the data into the store, we compare the FID of previously saved objects with the freshly sent object. Since the FIDs are same, we just store the data in a single array rather than creating a new one. And remember, FID is just the name, the value is still CID. After a while, the REST API sends back the response. This response has now 45 fields, but the 2 fields that we are interested in are 29-digit numbers. One is the same CID which we sent in the payload. Now can you guess the name of the other ID? It's FID. Turns out FID is an important number which is generated from the backend, although it is not used anywhere in the frontend. Now since REST API has responded back with the data, we must store it in the React store. In this case, we send the data as it is. So CID as CID and FID as FID. And we now compare the previously stored data from the sockets in the store with the new FID. And upon comparing, we get no results, which signals that this is apparently a new data. Well, why did we get no response? Didn't we already have the responses from the socket which have the same FID? Well, I told you that when saving data from the socket, we were actually storing CID, the original ID which was generated before hitting any of the APIs. Just the name of the key was changed to FID. But when storing response from the REST API, we are comparing the actual FID which is coming from the backend. And hence, we end up with 2 responses in the React store. Well, this was a logical error and the developers decided to correct this. So you know what they did? When receiving the response from the REST API, before they send it to the React store, they assign FID the value of CID. So as I said before, that FID that's received in the REST API response was not being used anywhere in the frontend. And the developers decided, might as well replace it with CID. So now both the CID and FID are actually CID. So there wasn't made any effort to fix the actual problem. About a week later, some new additions were suggested. And apparently the new feature addition consisted of some new APIs which were really critical. The payload for these APIs needed an important ID. Can you guess which one? Well, it's the FID which was earlier replaced with CID. Apparently the developers were so deep in the madness of it all, they thought that they are actually saving FID and FID and passed it into the new API. But they could never get a successful response from the API because they were sending the wrong data in the payload. But it was too late before they could realize the mistake. Untested APIs, unreviewed code, and lack of attention, causing an entire site to crash. So the website have a premium version for its paid subscribers and a non-premium version for the regular users and visitors. The developers made 2 different components for the 2 versions of the website, which could be thought of as intuitive at first glance. But upon further inspection, it was found that both the files shared many common features. Both the files had close to 2,500 lines of code. Out of 29 components that made up their component tree, 17 were just decorative components and could have been made reusable. About 68% of the state state variables were similar and could have been made part of a React context, along with conditional state, which tracks the type of user visiting the website. So many event handlers could have also made it to the context. Result, a lot of unmanageable code that was not only hard to debug, but a nightmare to even lay your eyes on. When asked to one of the developers who worked on the project about what led to this, he replied, "Our company got to know that we were not the only agency that this project was outsourced to. The Fushashka baddie had outsourced this project to 2 different agencies as well, and the full payments were not discharged to any of them. This led our leaders to believe that our company has yet to win the project. So they pressured us to deliver the project under very tight deadlines. We were given no break, even on Diwali, which is a major festival we look up to. And to save time, we had to duplicate an entire file, of course with a few modifications. The 2 developers who worked on the front end were interns, and they were made in charge of this. Provided how critical the project was perceived as by the company head, their decision making as to who will work in the project was as good as the R&D skills of those interns." So is outsourcing code the actual problem? Or is it the inability of companies to test the abilities of people they're outsourcing their code to? Or is it the inability of senior developers to properly review the code before it is pushed into the pipeline? Or is it the inability of senior project leads to be able to take proper decisions about gauging the time needed to complete the project, keeping in mind the best interests of their employees? Well, I honestly don't know which one it is. What are your opinions? Thanks for watching.